I've recognized over the years that he is one of my favorite Bible teachers, not just among Messianic Bible teachers, but among all Bible teachers.
He makes you realize how relevant the Bible is even today.
Each time we open up the Word together and I see something new and unique that I didn't see before.
That's what he does best. That is his calling. He's a great teacher. He's funny. He throws a little Yiddishkeit into all of his sermons and lectures, and I love that.
And that is why I think that he's probably the most excellent Bible teacher I've ever met.
I agree. He makes the Bible come alive.
This is someone who really knows what he's talking about.
Steve makes the Bible come alive.
Good evening. My name is Don Jones. I'm the executive pastor here at Beth Sar Shalom and worship leader. Welcome to tonight's broadcast. Beth Sar Shalom is a proud supporter of Sojourner Ministries and specifically this event. We are excited to bring this informative study to you as we look forward to Resurrection Sunday and reflect on the Passover week and the events that lead up to tonight. The study is brought to you by Stephen Gare. He's an author, a biblical scholar, radio personality, senior teaching pastor at Beth Sar Shalom, and the director of Sojourner Ministries. Join me as we welcome Stephen Gare to the broadcast and to Christ in the Passover.
Shalom. This is Stephen Gare, the director of Sojourner Ministries and the teaching pastor at Beth Sar Shalom Messianic Congregation. Tonight, we are going to explore the Jewish heart of Christianity. How are we going to do that? Through exploring the Passover, through discovering together how our Messiah fulfills the Passover, what Passover means to all of us, Jewish, Gentile alike, as followers of Yeshua, of our Messiah, Jesus. Sojourner Ministries is an organization that's dedicated to exploring the Jewish heart of Christianity. And when I say the Jewish heart of Christianity, what am I talking about? Well, the Jewish heart of Christianity is not a what, but a whom. Jesus, Yeshua, our Messiah, is the Jewish heart of our faith. Jesus is Jewish, born of a Jewish mother, circumcised on the 8th day, lived and died within a Jewish cultural context in the Hebrew homeland, the matrix of Israel. And what that means for us this evening is, if Yeshua is our Messiah, if he is our Lord, if he is our Savior, whether or not we are aware of it, right now, beating within each one of us, is that Jewish heart. So my role this evening is simply to facilitate a relationship between yourself and the one with whom you're already in contact with. And if there's someone who's watching tonight who does not yet know Yeshua, Jesus, as their Lord, as their Savior, as their Mashiach, Messiah, then my role is to be matchmaker and introduce you to the God who made the heavens and the earth. Now, how are we going to explore the Jewish heart of Christianity? By discovering how Yeshua fulfills the Passover. There are three prime reasons why everyone should understand what the Passover is all about. The first is that a study of Passover teaches us about our own faith. You know, the Bible was written at a different time period, a different language, a different culture, and for us to be able to understand all that Yeshua, that Jesus said regarding the upper room, regarding that Last Supper, we need to enter into the world, the cultural, social, historical, political milieu of the disciples. In other words, we need to walk a mile in the dusty sandals of the apostles, and we're going to do that by depositing ourselves right there in that upper room, as Jesus says, "This is my body, this is my blood." Well, second reason why we must know about the Passover is that it's the most important of all Jewish holidays. It is the oldest continually celebrated religious festival in the world. It dates back 3,500 years. And it is a holiday of redemption. Well, like every Jewish holiday, they're all holidays of redemption. Let me Let me share with you what I mean. The Jewish people, throughout our history, wherever we are in the land of Israel, outside the land of Israel, biblical times, post-biblical times, Jewish people always, let's be honest, get into trouble, right? Always getting into trouble. Some pharaoh, some king, some tyrant, some petty dictator, some prime minister, continually trying to destroy them, decimate them, annihilate them, exterminate them, exile them. And the Jewish people, in their stress and in their horror, they cry out to God. What do they cry out? Oy vey. And God, in his mercy, in his grace, he hears the cry of his people, and he rescues them. He redeems them. You could summarize the Jewish holidays like this. They attacked, we won, let's eat. But Passover is the holiday of redemption, par excellence. Because Passover is not just important to Jewish people. No. The story of Passover is a universal story of hope, and of freedom, and of redemption. The story of Passover proves conclusively that God actively intervenes in the course of human history on behalf of the people with whom he loves. The third reason that we study the Passover is that it was important to our Lord. You know, in Luke chapter 22, Jesus says, "With desire have I desired, with great passion have I eagerly desired to eat this Passover meal with you." That's a telling statement, and it is telling because of Jesus' identity. You know, Jesus was unique in all of human history because he was the only one of whom it could be said, fully God and fully man. And being both God and man, he was uniquely in control of his destiny. And Jesus could have chosen at any point in his three and a half year ministry to have laid down his life. He certainly had no shortage of willing assassins or assassination attempts, but Jesus, being in control of the time and the place where he would lay down his life, he chose to lay down his life at Passover in Jerusalem. You see, Jesus, like a condemned man who's allowed to choose his final meal on the evening prior to his execution, Jesus chooses for his last supper to be a Passover Seder. He chooses to eat the Passover just prior to becoming our Passover. And so, by the time we finish our time together, a very special, unique time together, we'll have a better understanding of what Passover means to the Jewish people, what it is that Yeshua was talking about, Jesus was talking about, when he said, "This is my body, this is my blood," and what it is we do as followers of Jesus each time we partake of communion in our own fellowships.
Hi, my name is Bob Chisholm. I teach at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'd like to say a few words on behalf of my former student and friend, Stephen Gare, the director of Sojourner Ministries. These are unprecedented times in our world. The COVID-19 virus has afflicted thousands in our country. Many have lost jobs and are under heavy financial pressure. Christian ministries are facing unique challenges. Sojourner Ministries is no exception. Stephen is unable to fuel the ministry by visiting churches, holding his annual Passover banquet, or distributing his books and videos in the normal fashion. The fuel tanks of the ministry are, as it were, close to being depleted. Most of you who are watching this are friends of the ministry. Like me, you appreciate its value. You know the importance of studying the Jewish heart of Christianity. You know how God has used the ministry to further Jesus' commission to make disciples. Stephen is grateful for your past support. He knows some of you are not in a position to help financially right now, and he welcomes your continuing prayer support. But everyone's circumstances are different. God has put some of you in a position where you are able to help in this time of need. On behalf of Stephen and Sojourner Ministries, I invite you to prayerfully consider doing just that. Thank you for your time, and may the Lord bless you richly.
We come to a time in our program where we're going to give you an opportunity to become a ministry partner with Sojourner Ministries. Sojourner Ministries, like many ministries at this time, needs your support. You can give to Sojourner Ministries right now by going into the website sojournerministries.com/donate and making an online contribution there. Or you can send that by U.S. mail to Sojourner Ministries, P.O. Box 497972, Garland, Texas 75049. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution. Throughout the evening, we will display on the top of the screen the message sojournerministries.com/donate to give you an opportunity to make your contribution. I will now turn you over to Stephen for the balance of the program. Enjoy.
This is a song that I wrote a year ago. And with all that's going on right now, the lyrics are more appropriate than ever. So let us sing this over you in this time of quarantine, remembering that God can never be quarantined, and He's right with us, ready to listen to our cries for help. Lord, we come before you now, asking for your mercy. In our weakness, be our strength. Restore what's lost and broken. Heal us, Lord. Renew our hearts. Revive the passion we once knew. Make our lives your song of praise. And since there's nothing we possess that you haven't given us, no wealth, no talent, no success, we lay our treasure at your feet. Heal us, Lord. Renew our hearts. Revive the passion we once knew. Make our lives your song of praise. And though this lifetime's but a breath, a fleeting, fading memory, we humbly ask this one request, that you make of us your instruments. Heal us, Lord. Renew our hearts. Revive the passion we once knew. Make our lives your song of praise. You call us out to teach your ways and train the ones who sought us. The widow bends, but now freedom reigns. on the way you led us on. We dedicate our lives to you, our hope, our goal, our one desire, our one desire. Our lives your song of praise. Make our lives your song of praise.
Let's begin by setting the stage. What was Passover like at the time of Jesus? What was Israel like in the time of the New Testament? Well, Jerusalem is a compact city, but as compact and crowded as it normally was, it quadruples in size because it is the location of the temple, the central location of worship. And 3 times a year, the Jewish people are commanded by God in the Torah to come to the temple to worship. Passover is one of those times. Of course, the other 2 are Pentecost later on, several weeks later, and then the fall tabernacles. So Pesach and Shavuot, Sukkot. But Passover is the most popular time. And it's so popular and it's so crowded, the pilgrims coming to Jerusalem, that the borders of the city are literally expanded. The rabbis, of course, rule that the borders of the city of Jerusalem go beyond the city walls. And it is beyond those city walls that we find in the Gospels, we find Yeshua and his merry men when they come, of course, with all the throngs of pilgrims. They come to celebrate the Passover. And we find them in the little village of Bethany. They're staying with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. The reason they're staying outside of Jerusalem is they can't fit. Let's be honest. How many hotels, how many inns could Jerusalem have? There's an old saying, no room at the inn. Let's be honest. How many Holiday Inns, how many Hyatt Regencies could they possibly have? How many Best Easterns could they have had 2,000 years ago? Not enough. And so people are staying in all kinds of people's homes, and it is a very festive and exciting time. And it's at this point that we pick up the gospel narrative. In Mark 14, verse 12, reads as follows: On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed. Passover is a complex of actually 2 major holidays. Passover, one day festival in which the Passover lambs are sacrificed. So not much of a celebration. Lambs are sacrificed that evening. The lambs are consumed as part of a giant festal meal called the Seder. And it is at that point, as the sun goes down on the festival of Passover, after the animals have been slaughtered, that we are going to embark upon a 7-day feast called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. These 2 holidays are interchangeable in the gospel narratives and in Acts throughout the New Testament. And today we simply use the term Passover. Unleavened bread has fallen out of favor. But we're actually technically talking about 2 holidays. And Mark wants you to understand this, that we're talking about 2 holidays, but it's the first day of Passover. In other words, the day when the lambs are going to be sacrificed. And Jesus' disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" That's an excellent question. We find out in the parallel passage in Luke that it's Peter and John asking this question. And what are they actually asking Jesus? They're saying, "Jesus, it's crowded today. Passover's tonight. We're going to have a Seder tonight. Have you made reservations? I know you've been very busy. It's been a full week turning over tables and arguing and teaching and making whips. But really, truly, we have to eat within the city walls. Where are we going to consume our Passover? That's something we haven't discussed yet. And Yeshua says to them not to worry. He sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him." So here's the mission. Jesus sends Peter and John into the city of Jerusalem, super crowded, 4 times its normal citizenry, and you're going to go look for some guy carrying water on his head. Go look for Jughead. Actually, not as hard a task as you would think, because in the ancient times of the Bible, men did not carry water. That was considered, pardon me, in our enlightened era, it was considered women's work. And so what Jesus is actually saying, go look for the guy who's ahead of his time. Go look for the women's liber. Go look for the liberated Jewish guy with the water on his head. Find Jughead. And wherever he enters and you follow him, say to the owner of the house, the teacher says, the rabbi is asking, where is my guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he himself will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Prepare for us there. So that's actually what Yeshua is describing, is follow a guy and he's going to take you to a nice neighborhood, a neighborhood with substantial homes, a home nice enough to have an upper room that can be dedicated to entertaining guests. And go into that house, go into that room, and see that everything is prepared. And so the disciples went out and came to the city, found it just as he had told them, and so they prepared the Passover. Now, what's entailed in setting up or preparing for the Passover? Well, before we get to the sacrifice of lambs in the New Testament times and the times of the gospel, we've got to make sure the home itself, the domicile, is prepared. How is a domicile, how is a home prepared for Passover? One must clear out all the leaven in the home. It is going to be called, after all, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when the Jewish people are commanded by God to eat for 7 days unleavened bread and not to eat leaven. So we still do this today. We clear out all the leaven from our homes and anything that's got yeast in it, Oreo cookies, Famous Amos, Captain Crunch, Entenmann's, Mrs. Bairdstein's bread, whatever we've got in our home that's got leaven in it, we have to remove from the house. If we can't remove it from the house, traditionally it's burned or thrown in the garbage. But if we cannot do that, because especially like now, if we have shopped at Sam's or at Costco, and we have not only so much toilet paper, but we have excess leaven in the house, what we can do is we can put all the leaven, combine it all in one cupboard, in one pantry closet, and we can close the door, put a piece of tape on the door, and it's out of our possession. In fact, technically speaking, you sell your leaven to a Gentile neighbor, and it's no longer in your possession. At the end of the week, you can get your leaven back. Maybe you're missing a couple of cookies, I don't know. And if it's in a closet, you can sell the whole closet. But nonetheless, the leaven is out of your possession. Leaven in the Bible is a symbol of sin. Remember, Jesus says to beware the leaven of the Pharisees. Beware that which is puffed up. Beware the sin that emanates. And so leaven, when we remove the leaven from the home, we are symbolically purifying our domicile. We're symbolically purifying our house. We're removing all the leaven. We're symbolically removing all the sin. A purified environment. Many of us this week, we went through our homes with the Lysol wipes, and we cleared down everything, and we made sure that everything was super clean and spotless. And this is exactly the idea, but more so. And removing all the leaven so that there's not even symbolic sin remaining in the home. So this, of course, would have been done by the master of the home, or by, more likely, the servants. It's a nice home with the upper room. And so that's all done. And now Yeshua's disciples, Peter and John, would have made their way to the temple courts. They would have procured a perfect unblemished lamb. A perfect unblemished lamb. I actually happen to have one right here. And this perfect unblemished lamb, every group is going to be sacrificing a perfect, unblemished, one-year-old lamb. That is the tradition, that is the command at Passover. Now, there's far too many lambs to be sacrificed on this day that the priests themselves, who would normally do the sacrifice, they don't do the sacrificing. It is each individual who is there representing his group with their lamb, as Peter and John in this instance, indicating with two disciples, indicating that we have at least one lamb. We might actually have two, depending on the size of the group of disciples meeting in that upper room. It's certainly sizable. And so this lamb is going to be sacrificed by Peter, John. They would slit the throat of the animal. The priest would be there in a supervisory support category, and they would be collecting the blood of the lamb in a gold silver bowl. They'd pass them down, long line of priests, line, assembly line fashion. It was the Jewish people who invented the assembly line. I don't know if you knew that, not Henry Ford, like you may have learned. And they dash the blood on the altar, and then the bowls come back and they collect the entrails, the fat of the animal, and those are also passed down, and those are burnt on the altar down a long line of priests. And so the animal then is skinned, wrapped up in its own skin, and taken, put on the heads, on the shoulders rather, of the disciples, of the worshipers, and they will exit the temple courts. It's actually, they're going to exit the temple courts, and another group's coming in. There's actually 3 services. Some of us have churches that are particularly large in number, and more people want to attend and worship with us than we possibly can accommodate in our facilities. So we break into 2, sometimes 3, sometimes even 4 services, the same way the temple was at this particular time. And so there are 3 different services, each service lasting about 25 minutes apiece. The whole Passover sacrificial time lasts no more than 2 hours. 2-hour period of time in the afternoon. The lambs are taken. They are taken to the homes, to the courtyard in front of the home. There are communal clay stoves that are fired up. A pomegranate spit is inserted in the animal from stem to stern, and they are rotisseried for the next few hours until, as the sun goes down, those lambs will soon be ready to be eaten and be part of the Seder meal.
Sojourner Ministries is worth financially supporting because there's integrity. Your dollars will be stretched to the max, used skillfully to reach Jewish people.
Sojourner Ministries is worth financially supporting because there's no other ministry like this that I'm aware of.
The ministry fills a void, whether it's knowledge of the Bible, questions that you have in your daily life, how am I living my life?
It provides a context for those of us who are serious Bible students to really understand what we're reading and what we're studying.
I'm sure the Lord is pleased with a ministry like Sojourner Ministries.
And it's the more that Steve can expand his outreach, the more effective he'll be, the more of a difference he'll make in this world.
The reason Sojourner Ministries is worth supporting with your prayers and finances, is because it is an eloquent voice communicating the Jewishness of the Scriptures. It is taking the message that Messiah has come and Messiah has provided atonement.
And why not support that? He's given so much to us, we should give back.
Now, if we continue in the Gospel of Mark, it reads as follows. When it was evening, he came with the 12 as they were reclining at the table and eating. Now, that's a detail I don't want you to miss. Somehow, the great master of the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, who painted that extraordinary fresco called The Last Supper, which really has captured our imaginations. And in fact, almost every film that deals with the Last Supper, that includes the Last Supper, uses the framework of what Leonardo da Vinci sets up, which is actually very convenient if you're filming or taking a picture or painting, because everybody's on one side of the table and everybody's looking at the camera. But this is not what it looked like. Leonardo's got them all on one side of a long white table. They're actually eating a nice piece of fish. No, they're going to be having lamb that evening. He didn't get the details right. He didn't get the framework right. Leonardo, for the great masterwork that the Last Supper is, it's really a big fat mistake. Sorry, Leonardo. I guess somebody slipped you the wrong code. But with all my respect to Leonardo da Vinci, not Jewish. So let me explain what Passover actually looks like in time of Jesus. There were no long white tables, no tables really per se at all. If there were tables, they were low, very low tables, and sometimes they were set up in a U shape, kind of three-sided table. Sometimes there are simply small round tables like TV tables, but low to the ground, made of wood or stone, and people would lay on their left elbow, stretching their legs out very comfortably, on couches and cushions and pillows, very relaxed, enjoying themselves, eating from with their right hand from communal bowls. Maybe like some of us will spread out with our families watching a nice movie on Netflix with a communal bowl of popcorn between us. You know, pass me the popcorn, Mabel. Unless, of course, your wife's name's not Mabel. But this is exactly what it looked like. We can think of the films, the movies where we see the rich aristocracy of Greece and Egypt and Rome, the Greco-Roman world. We see them eating, reclining, being fanned by big giant grape leaves. Pass me another grape, Mark Antony. And this was exactly it. Because at Passover time, no Jew is singing, "If I Were a Rich Man," because every Jew is a rich man, is a free man, is a king at Passover time. And this is how the rich people ate, the aristocracy ate, reclining. That makes perfect sense, of course, when we read the passage in John, where it tells us that the disciple whom Jesus loved was reclining with his head near Jesus' chest. That makes a whole lot more sense if they're reclining than if they're sitting at a table. Did you ever try to sit at a table and put your head on the chest of the person immediately to one side of you? It's very awkward, and God forbid you're eating soup. It can be a disaster. But if you're reclining, it's very easy for you to put your head on my shoulder. It's very easy for Yeshua, after he announces, "Hey, listen up, everybody, heads up. One of you is about to betray me." And while the room is abuzz with, "Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? Who is he going to betray? Who's he talking about?" For Jesus to simply lean over to the one who's reclining near his chest and say, "The one with whom I'm dipping into the bitter herbs is the one who will betray me." And John is the only one that evening who hears the identity of the betrayer. Well, Peter also, he's got big ears, but that's it. Just really John, maybe Peter, they're the only ones who hear the identity of the betrayer. So what did they do when they were at their Passover meal, their Seder meal, reclining on couches and cushions, very comfortable, very enjoying the meal? What is the Passover all alike? What's the meaning of the word Seder? Seder is a Hebrew word that means ritual. And so it is a liturgical meal. A Seder is a liturgical meal. Certain foods eaten in certain order, certain symbolic foods are eaten and drunk, all in a particular order. Certain psalms are recited, prayers are recited, stories are told, all part of a very lengthy evening. And the evening is compartmentalized primarily with the use of two major symbols. Let me show you what I mean.
This song is a traditional Passover song, generally sung around the table. It has 15 verses, and each verse builds on the next, like links in a musical chain. The kids usually like this one very much so, but the portion that we're going to do, just one verse and a couple of choruses, it basically translates that the Lord had brought us out of Egypt and had not judged the Egyptians, it would have been enough. The song's called Dayenu. It would have been sufficient, or it would have been enough. And so the whole song is, if you had just done this and not done the next, and it builds and builds and builds. So this one is simply, if you had simply brought us out of Egypt and not judged the Egyptians. There's another verse, if you'd only split the sea and not taken us through. I don't know what the point of splitting the sea and not taking them through would have been, but then you wouldn't have a song and you wouldn't have a good movie with Charlton Heston either. But let's try this in Hebrew, Dayenu. Ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu. Again. Ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu. Chorus. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. All right, now I know all of you watching at home, you really want to sing along with us. So you're in the privacy of your own quarantine. Nobody's going to criticize you. Sing along with us. The words are on the screen. Ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu. Again. Ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Now be very quiet, or the neighbors might hear. Now they won't hear, but we'll sing it together. Dayenu, 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 and Dayenu, 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 Dayenu.
Passover is organized around the drinking of 4 cups. 4 cups of wine, with the fruit of the vine, grape juice, doesn't matter. But 4 cups, the fruit of the vine, are drunk. But each cup at the Passover is given a name, and the names of the 4 cups are as follows. Now pay attention, those of you watching at home. The names of the cups are, first of all, is named after one of the promises that God gives the Jewish people in Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 and following. So, for example, when God says to Moses, I will sanctify you, I will sanctify, I'll consecrate you, I'll set you apart. We call the first cup the cup of sanctification, the cup of consecration, the cup of sanctification, the cup that is set apart. It sets the evening apart. So the drinking of this first cup, the cup of sanctification, is what sets this evening apart. Now that is followed by the second cup, named after the second I will, the second promise that is recorded in Exodus 6:6 and following. And God says, I will deliver you with an outstretched hand. I will deliver you from Egyptian bondage. And so we call the second cup the cup of deliverance. The third cup is named after the third promise, I will redeem you. I will take you to myself. I will redeem you. And so the third cup, what do you think it's called? The cup of redemption. Now the fourth cup, the name is a little bit more complicated because this phrase is actually pregnant with many blessings from God relating back to the Abrahamic Covenant and the promises to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And so we call the fourth cup, I like to call it the cup of consummation. Now, not the cup of consommé, the cup, that's something else entirely, the cup of consummation. So 4 cups that are drunk over the course of a very lengthy meal, a period of time, hours long, when you are reclining, you're going to be drinking several cups of wine, eating not just all you can eat, but all you must eat. The entire lamb must be consumed that evening. There's no refrigeration, there's no leftovers. This is not Thanksgiving. This is Passover, and so what doesn't get consumed by midnight must be destroyed. And so there's a lot of food, a lot of time. So can you imagine eating such a heavy meal, reclining as you are, uncomfortable pillows and couches, and then all of a sudden after such a big long meal and cups consumed, Yeshua says, hey, let's go outside for a little while and have a prayer meeting. And it's no surprise, because if we put ourselves in the position of the disciples, it's no surprise why when they go to close their eyes and pray along with Jesus, that in 2 seconds they fall asleep. They're snoring loudly enough that Yeshua is disturbed, and he says, what's going on here? 3 times this happens, but the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. So that's the first major symbol of the Passover Seder, the meal with an order, the liturgical meal. The second major symbol of Passover deals with what's called Matzah. This, ladies and gentlemen, is unleavened bread of Feast of Unleavened Bread fame. It is unleavened bread. It is the bread that doesn't rise. Look at how absolutely flat it is. In fact, this year as a special treat, I brought not just normal matzah that you can find in the supermarket pretty much wherever you are, machine-made matzah, but I also brought some fancy schmancy handmade matzah from Israel. This, my friends, is called Schmira Matzo. I took a bite of it, excuse me, already. I got hungry waiting for the cameras to be set up. But this is Schmira Matzo, which means guarded or watched matzah. You know the difference between normal everyday matzah and Schmira Matzo? About $6 a box. That's not a lie, but this is guarded personally to make sure that no more than 18 minutes elapse in its making, and you can see it's irregular and that it has it's a little bit different than the machine-made matzah, but nonetheless, the characteristics are almost precisely the same. This is a little bit more brittle and, frankly, a little tastier than the normal matzah, but they both are very similar, very much alike. So this is what we eat for the week. Not all we eat, but it's something that we have to include in our diet to remember the commands of God from Torah. This in the Bible is bread that didn't rise. In Hebrew, it's called lechem oni. Lechem oni, which is translated the bread of affliction. And, you know, after a couple of days of eating this, you understand exactly why it's called the bread of affliction. And where it's going to go, and its part in the Seder ceremony, is actually very special. And I have 3 pieces of matzah right here to serve a very important purpose. And you're going to find this on every Seder table. Now, there's a specially designed and constructed bag. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this, but it's got a pretty picture on it. Now, there's all different kinds, all different designs, but this one happens to have, it says Pesach, Passover, and it's got a nice table design on it. But that's not what's important about this bag. What's important is that it has one empty compartment, absolutely nothing inside, nothing whatsoever. It has a second compartment, absolutely nothing inside, nothing whatsoever. And it has a third compartment, absolutely nothing inside, nothing absolutely nothing you can see, nothing inside. These 3 pieces of matzah are going to fit perfectly inside each of these pockets. And together, this is called the unity. And it's quite likely that it does go back to New Testament times, Second Temple times. I'll tell you how I know how ancient it is. It's so ancient that nobody knows how this tradition got started, nor can any group agree as to the significance of these three pieces of matzah in unity together within this bag. In fact, I got to tell you, certainly in the time of Yeshua, they didn't have fancy schmancy matzah tash, a little matzah bag like this. They would have separated three linens, three napkins. They would have put them on a table, separated, if they were doing it at this time. Now, what we do with these three pieces of matzah is very, very interesting. The first piece of matzah is bypassed. The third piece of matzah is bypassed. But the second piece of matzah is taken from the unity. It is removed from the unity. It is broken roughly in half, like so. One half of the broken second piece of matzah returns to the unity, to these three pieces of matzah together. This other broken piece, I have a crummy job ahead of me here. See what I did there? The piece of matzah is taken and it is wrapped up in a linen napkin, like so. And this broken piece of matzah, wrapped up in a linen napkin, is taken and hidden away until after the meal is completed. When the meal, the Seder meal, is finished, last series of events is the Afikomen, this broken piece of matzah, this ceremonial dessert, is found. It is returned to the master of ceremonies, to the father, to whoever is running and orchestrating the Seder meal, and it's redeemed. In other words, this broken piece of matzah, called the Afikomen, there's no quiz later on, don't worry about remembering what it's called, Afikomen around the mountain, when she comes, whatever it takes you to remember, doesn't matter if you remember or not. Nonetheless, this Afikomen is hidden away. Now, you generally, if you have young people in your Seder table, in your Seder meal, this is how you keep them interested. You have a contest at the end of the meal. Who can find the broken piece of matzah? Whoever finds the broken piece of matzah brings it to the master of ceremonies and returns it, redeems it. In other words, they give it to me, and I give them a small gift, a couple of dollars, a few coins, whatever the case may be. Idea being, find matzah, get dough. But this is, it's a nice way to make a living. As a child, I can testify. Once a year, you knew at that point you were at least going to get $1. You might not be able to eat normal bread, but Wonder Bread, but you could at least make $1 from finding the Afikomen. Now the rates have gone up slightly with inflation since I was a child, but nonetheless, this Afikomen becomes the ceremonial dessert. Now, it's not a real dessert, because it's not going to fill everybody up. You get a little piece, it's broken up into small pieces, divvied up. It's no substitute for a good, sweet, yummy dessert. Let's be honest, Jewish people love desserts. I love dessert, but it's symbolic. What is it symbolic of? Well, what is the meaning of this Afikomen with this broken piece of matzah? What is the meaning of these three pieces of matzah together? There are many different explanations. I don't know if you've heard this expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And this is true. Nobody can agree on the significance and what the meaning of this Passover holiday event means. Some would explain that the 3 pieces of matzah represent the 3 Hebrew patriarchs. That would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, obviously, in that scenario, you would have the center patriarch, Isaac, would be in the middle. So the question, however, I would ask as a cynic is, why would you break Isaac? What does that have to do with anything? You remember, he wasn't sacrificed in the scripture. He was almost sacrificed, Genesis 22. Almost, but no, saved in the nick of time by the ram caught by its horns in the thicket. So why are you breaking poor Isaac? What did he do to you? Some would say that when Abraham was entertaining the 3 angels and he served them some bread, that it was matzah. And so these 3 represent the 3 angels that Abraham entertained. But again, in this instance, I also have to ask the question, why would you pick on one matzah, one angel versus the other angels? Which angel are you going to pick on? Why would you pick on the guy in the middle simply because he's in the middle? How is he different from the others? Did he do anything to you? Did he offend you personally? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. There are many different explanations, almost as many explanations as what this ceremony means as there are Jewish Seder tables. But let me give you a little insight, personal insight from one Jewish believer in Jesus, straight from the heart. For me, as a fourth generation Jewish believer, now when I say I'm a Jewish believer, you may not know what that is. So let me digress for just a moment and share with you my identity. This is my not so secret identity, what it means to be a fourth generation Jewish believer. Almost a century ago now, my great grandmother, Helen Koser, Jewish immigrant, found her Messiah in the Holy Land, by which I mean Brooklyn, New York. And she came to faith, a Jewish woman, came to faith in Yeshua, in Jesus, as her Jewish Messiah. And she passed down her faith one generation at a time. First to my grandmother, then my grandmother returned the favor and passed it on, paid it forward to my mother, and my mother passed down the faith entrusted to her to me. So in my family history, I am the fourth generation of Jewish, ethnically Jewish person who follows Jesus as his Messiah. That makes me a fourth generation Jewish believer. I've returned the favor, I paid it forward, passed it on, and now I have a son who's fifth generation. So you could say that exploring the Jewish heart of Christianity is, for me, very much a family tradition and one that I'm delighted to share with you. So now that you know what my secret identity, not so secret identity as a Jewish believer is, I can explain to you what I see when I look at the three pieces of matzah, with the second piece of matzah taken, broken, and wrapped up in linen. I see a beautiful picture of the Trinity, of the triunity. It's called the unity after all. And there's three in one here. The Father, the Son, the Spirit, the second person, the Son, taken, broken, wrapped up in linen, hidden away, buried, if you will, but only for a predetermined period of time. At which point, this broken matzah returns and becomes the center of everyone's attention. So, right here on the Seder table, a beautiful picture of not only our Messiah, but of God himself, to remind us of his complexity. And frankly, I am very glad that our God is complex, as the Bible teaches. I'm glad that he is not a single-celled amoeba, and that he's so complex that I, as a creation, as a creature that he created, that I can't exactly explain or wrap my head around his immensity or his complexity. I simply know what the Bible teaches.
The book of Steve's that had the greatest impact, I think, is the Acts commentary. It really talks about how the Messiah actually came for the Jews. And in spite of being rejected, there was a continuing effort to bring the Jews to the Messiah.
Acts is such a journey.
Acts is an amazing commentary in that regard. It literally jumps off the pages and really makes you understand.
The chutzpah, the guts that they had, those early believers.
There were so many things that amazed me as to how the gospel was accepted by Jews, and then the expansion to Gentiles. And it made me realize that I should be very thankful that all of this happened, because as a Gentile, I wouldn't have been part of the blessing and part of God's salvation.
It's an amazing, amazing story.
Well, Acts was wonderful, but Hebrews is the special, really the favorite for me.
And he does a wonderful job of coordinating the background of Hebrews from the book of Leviticus to help us understand and apply the book of Hebrews.
Hebrews explains the old versus the new and how the new is better in so many different ways.
These are materials that help us do ministry, that help me do ministry. It helps me to evangelize. It helps me to disciple. It helps me to teach. Perhaps you're Jewish and you're not sure whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. Let me encourage you to avail yourself of the excellent resources that Sojourner Ministry provides. It will convince you that Messiah has come and Messiah has provided atonement.
Now, during the Seder, it is tradition to retell the story of the Passover. Now, by this time, every Jewish kid is saying, "Rub-a-dub-dub, where's my grub? Let's get to the good stuff. Let's eat already." We know the story of Passover. We've seen the movie, both the live action and the cartoon. In fact, we own it on the Blu-ray. Let's watch it tomorrow. Right now, let's get to the... No. You cannot skip, you cannot pass over the story of Passover, because it is incumbent upon each Jewish person to believe and understand that God personally redeemed, rescued, delivered every Jewish person throughout history in that one event, seeing that we were technically in the loins of our ancestors and our ancestors. And so it is incumbent upon each of us to believe that we were personally redeemed by God. And so we retell the story with very much using our imagination and placing ourselves in the midst of that story. Now, that sounds a little bit out there. It may sound a little bit esoteric, a little bit mystical to some of you, fanciful perhaps. But if you think about it, the same idea fuels the way we take communion and what we believe about the meaning of communion. Let me explain what I mean. 2,000 years ago, none of us were around when our Messiah gave his life for us. But yet, when we take communion, we believe that he died for each one of us personally. And the answer is, that's because he did. You see, as Yeshua, Jesus, hung there suffering for the sins of humanity on that cross, in the midst of his humiliation, in the midst of his suffering, in the midst of his degradation, in the midst of all that agony, one of the faces that would have crossed his mind was your face, because he was thinking of you. Furthermore, as he hung there in the harsh Judean sun of early spring, literally losing bodily fluids with each moment, with each breath, one of the names on his parched, dry, cracked, arid lips would have been your name, because he was thinking of you, because he died for you personally. Why would he do such a thing? Simply because he loves you. Our Messiah loves you so much. I'm talking to you. Our Messiah loves you so much that even if you were the only person ever to have been born, he would have gone through every bit of agony and suffering that he did, just because he loves you that much. Of course, in that illustration, you would have been the one also nailing him to the cross, which also is accurate, because as the prophet Isaiah said, he was pierced for yours, mine, our transgressions. And the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. So that when we take communion, when we partake of, whether you take it once a year or once a quarter or once a month or once a week or however often you partake in the Eucharist, Thanksgiving, this great act of what Yeshua did, we can with confidence, with boldness, believe that Jesus did indeed die for each one of us personally, because he did. The Lord of all time most assuredly had you in mind from the very foundation of the world. And that's really the way Jewish people partake of Passover, that each one of us personally went through the Exodus. So having said that, let's retell the story of Passover as revealed in the Scripture. Somewhere around 1800 BC, you have the third of the Hebrew patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Third of the Hebrew patriarchs would have been Jacob. And Jacob's got 12 sons. Now, I'm not interested in the names of the 12. I'm only actually interested in one. This guy is a certain unique son. He has a certain set of unique qualities, je ne sais quoi, shall we say, which is Hebrew for je ne sais quoi. He has a style, a panache. He's a snazzy dresser. He likes the fuchsia, the chartreuse. He likes the Broadway musicals. Who is this guy? You know the answer. Joseph, right? Joseph. And Joseph is sold into slavery. His brothers are very jealous of Joseph and his style, and they sell him into Egyptian slavery. And there he remains as a slave. Now, through a set of fortuitous circumstances and blessings that unfold in the final portion of the book of Genesis, we see of low slave to head of a household, suffers a giant setback, set into a dungeon, ultimately is raised to a great position, elevated to a position of power and magnitude, second only to Pharaoh over all Egypt. You can think of Joseph as Mr. Egypt himself. Now, due to some dreams, his foresight, his insight delivered from God, he sets aside a certain amount of food. He sees a period of famine coming, a 7-year period of famine, and he prepares Egypt for this famine by setting aside huge quantities of food to ride this out. And a famine does indeed strike not just Egypt, the entire region, including the land of Canaan, where his brothers, his father, where his family is. And the brothers, in order to feed their family, they have got to go where the food is. There's only one place in the entire region where there's enough food to beg, and that is Egypt. And they are ushered into the throne room of who else but Mr. Egypt himself, who is in charge of this program. And Joseph sitting on his throne, he sees his brothers after all these years. Now, he recognizes them immediately. You do not forget that kind of betrayal. You cannot forget being treated that way by your own family. He sees them, he recognizes them immediately. They, on the other hand, partially likely because they assumed he died years ago, and it has been truly decades since they have seen him, but also don't underestimate the power of a gold lame and a little Egyptian eye makeup, what it can do to change your appearance. But the brothers do not recognize him. And they are bowing down, literally prostrate in front of him, begging for their lives and the lives of their family back home. And Joseph looks at these brothers who have treated him so wickedly, so evilly, who have been so despicable to him, betraying him that way. He looks at these brothers who have betrayed him, and he says to them, boo! No, he says, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you betrayed. But don't be afraid. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. I'm in a position of power now to be able to deliver my family. And so I want you to bring the entire family from Canaan, where there's no food, to Egypt, where there's plenty of food. Bring the whole family, including Dad. the whole mishpucha, the whole clan. And that's indeed what happened. 70, 75 Hebrews, that's all they were at the time. They come and live with Joseph in Egypt. And there they do very, very well. They are blessed by God, and they begin to multiply. They begin to multiply like bunnies, like rabbits. Now that's the context of the first chapter of Exodus. Now a new Pharaoh arises, a new dynasty. Some time goes by, a dynasty arises, a new Pharaoh comes to power who does not remember the economic nor political contributions that Joseph made to the land of Egypt. All he can see are these rapidly multiplying Hebrews who are in their midst, and he is afraid that they are going to be a fifth column in the land and that they are threatening his own native people of Egypt. And he goes to his advisors and says, what shall we do? The advisors say, well, there are a couple of building programs we've been putting off. And so Pharaoh says, aha, and he enslaves them. And he enslaves the Hebrew people. It not only helps Pharaoh get some things done, some cities done, it's cross them off his to-do list, but also it actually runs counter to what he assumed was going to happen. If he insisted that they go to work, he assumed that their birth rate would slow down. But no, the more they worked, the more they were enslaved, the more God is blessing them with progeny. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh says, this is not working, it's not enough. And so he decides to embark on a genocide of the newborn Hebrew boys, baby boys, and decides to drown them in the river. An entire generation are slaughtered that way by Pharaoh and the populace of Egypt who went along with the government. They obeyed the government and slaughtered the little Jewish baby boys. One set of parents refused to submit their baby to this genocide, and they hid him away. And when they could hide him no longer, they put him in a basket down the Nile, where he would very conveniently for him pass by the royal household. And he is spotted by the daughter of Pharaoh, and he's adopted. So the Hebrew people, meanwhile, enslaved, they're crying out to God for God to send them a deliverer, send them a redeemer, send them someone to break the shackles of Egyptian bondage from their shoulders, take the lash away from their backs. And God hears their cries. He hears their prayers. He sends them a redeemer. He sends them a deliverer. Who does he send them? Charlton Heston. No. He sends them Moses. Are you paying attention? The baby in the basket, right? Okay. Yeah. So this baby is raised as an Egyptian prince. Now, unlike the movies, this guy always knows his identity as a Hebrew. He's not a secret Hebrew. He's a Hebrew. And he's raised in the Egyptian court as an Egyptian prince. And at a certain point in his life, at the pinnacle of his physical and political prowess as a prince of Egypt, he decides to identify with his people who are enslaved. And he views himself as the deliverer of his people. And he sees one of his people, one of the Hebrews, oppressed. And he sees the Egyptian is going to beat this Hebrew slave to death. And he saves the life of the Hebrew by slaughtering the Egyptian who was persecuting the slave. One person saw what he did, however. It was the Hebrew slave. The Hebrew slave whom he rescued apparently repaid Moses by blabbing. And so the next day there's a dispute between the Hebrews, and he says, who made you a judge over us? Are you going to slay us like you slayed the Egyptian? And Moses realizes that he has got to leave town. He exchanges the glories of being a prince of Egypt for the humility, for the degradation of being a desert shepherd. And Moses remains a desert shepherd for the next 40 years, until at the age of 80. At the age of 80, when most of us are either retired or sliding for home, Moses encounters God at the burning bush. And God says to Moses, Moses, go back to Egypt and speak to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to release your people. And Moses said to the Lord, Lord, I'm not so hot. Been there. I like the desert. I like the sheep. I like the mountains. I like the heat. I'm a boy. Find somebody else. And the Lord says to Moses yet again, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Moses responds, look, I'm no longer the prince of Egypt. I was the prince of Egypt. You missed a chance back then. Now, who am I to speak to Pharaoh? Who am I to tell Pharaoh, let my people go? I'm just a shepherd. I have no cachet. I have no power. And finally, one more time, the Lord says to Moses, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And Moses says, here am I, Lord. Send Aaron. No. Moses finally, it takes it 5 times. 5 no's. And finally Moses agrees. He goes back to Pharaoh. And Moses, my people go, thus saith the God of Israel. And Pharaoh responds, I will not let you go, nor do I know this God you worship. To which God says, allow me to introduce myself. And he sends 10 signs, plagues, calling cards of his power over Pharaoh, over Egypt, over the people, and over the over 80 gods of Egypt that were worshipped. Starting with the relatively novel turning the drinking water into blood, escalating with each plague until finally we get to the death of the firstborn of all Egypt. How is it that the Hebrews were able to avoid the devastation of this particular them? Take a lamb, a perfect, unblemished lamb. Live with it for 4 days. Watch to make sure that it's indeed perfect. Of course, 4 days also about the time your kids become attached to it. But nonetheless, at the end of 4 days, take this lamb, slit its throat, capture the blood of that perfect unblemished lamb in a basin. Take the basin of blood outside. Take hyssop. Stir the blood so that it does not become coagulated. And then dab it, paint it on the doorposts and on the lintel of the door. And when I come, God says, when I come to destroy the firstborn of all Egypt, I will see the blood on your door, and I will pass over you. And that's exactly what happens. Before the sun comes up that next morning, a cry of unprecedented anguish, devastation, and desolation arises in the land of Egypt, such as never been heard before nor since. Not one household is untouched by the death of their firstborn sons, including Pharaoh. And Pharaoh summons Moses to his throne room. And he tells Moses, take what spoils you will, but get out. And Moses goes back to his people. And he says, take what spoils you will, we're getting out. And the Hebrews do indeed leave that morning. Now, several days go by after they've left Egypt's borders. And God tells them to zig and zag a little bit, giving Pharaoh enough time to change his mind about the decision that he'd made. And Pharaoh's mind is changed. He changes his mind. He sends his army to bring back or slaughter those slaves whom he allowed to escape, the entire Israelite nation. At this point, God had told Moses to lead the people to the Red Sea, where they are stopped by the Red Sea. Now coming, charging hard upon them from their rear is the army of Pharaoh. The Hebrew people look at the Red Sea, no escape. They look at the impending doom of the hard-charging army of Pharaoh. And then they look to Moses and say, Moses, you stink. Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us all the way out here? You schlepped us out here so that we can die in the desert? Moses tells them, stand still. Open your eyes and close your mouths. See the salvation of the Lord. Those Egyptians that you are so afraid of right now, after today you will see them no more. And Moses is told by God to approach the sea, to take his staff, and to raise his arm over the sea. And when he does so, staff in hand, the sea separates. Two walls of water on either side of a pathway of dry ground, not muddy, but dry ground. The seabed, a path of safety. Now the Hebrews, they had seen 10 plagues. They had seen a lot of really impressive stuff that God had done. Locusts and hail and darkness and all manner of things. But they had never seen a miracle like this before. And they look at Moses, not so bad after all, and they look at this miracle and they say as one people with one voice, not bad. And they run, they go, they run, they cross the sea. Why did the Hebrews cross the sea? To get to the other side. Come on. It's not rocket science. Moses leads them across the sea. Of course, at this point, Pharaoh's army catches up to them, and the army enters the dry ground of the seabed, the walls of water on either side, and gives chase. The Hebrews, however, get to the other side. They get to safety. The moment that they reach safety, God tells Moses, take your hands and close them together, and the walls of water collapse in on the Egyptian army. Too late! They see that there is no escape, and the army is wiped out. It's drowned. And that is the true beginning of the freedom of the Hebrew people and the escape, the story of the escape of the Jewish people from Egyptian bondage. That is what Jewish people for 3,500 years have been telling and passing down this story from father to son to grandson to great-grandson, generation after generation, over and over again. That is what we remember. And you can't remember a story of that magnitude, no matter how well told, by just listening with the ears. You have to engage all the senses. And so the Seder is designed to engage not just the ears, not just the eyes, but all 5 senses. Let me show you what I mean.
What comes to mind are the quality equipping materials that Sojourner offers, the commentaries, the audio teachings. I think my favorite resource material would have to be the CD set that covers all of the feasts in the Jewish tradition, all of the biblical holy days that are associated with Jewish culture and Jewish practice.
That was one of the first things that I listened to, and I didn't know all of that. Even being married to Joel, I was not aware of all of that, and he just brought those. You could almost hear the people coming to the feast, and I love those. We've listened to those several times.
That has really given me a big picture overview of where God is moving in history and how significant the Jewish calendar is.
Directly in front of me, I have what's called a Seder plate. And you can see it's a specially designed plate with certain indentations that go around the plate. And you'll find this on the Seder table. And in each one of these indentations would go a symbolic food element that will help to retell the story of Passover by engaging the senses. This is very much like a lazy Susan without the lazy. There's nothing, you just have to pass it. It doesn't spin. But I have for tonight, I have in various different containers each one of these items so I can hold them up. Now, the first item, symbolic item that I have is parsley. This parsley is symbolic of the hyssop. Remember what the hyssop is used for at Passover, the Passover story? It is that that paints the doorposts and the lintels of the Hebrew homes with the blood of the Lamb. And when the Lord comes to destroy the firstborn of all Egypt, he sees the blood and he passes. So we have a symbol of redemption. The parsley symbolizes the hyssop used to paint the doorpost and lintel. Now, this parsley will be dipped in the course of going through these symbolic Seder elements into a bowl of salt water. Now, the salt water, this is one of those 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Okay, depends on who you ask. I say the more the merrier when it comes to symbolic meaning. But salt water, what this would represent, first of all, the salty tears that the Jewish people shed when they were enslaved by Pharaoh. But secondly, and this is the symbolic meaning that I tend to lean toward, represents the Red Sea, the water of the Red Sea through which the Hebrews were able to escape. So thus, we have together, when we dip the parsley into the salt water, we have the marriage of 2 great symbols of God's redemption in the Exodus, the hyssop and the waters of the Red Sea, the parsley and the symbolic salt water. We have another item. This is everybody's favorite, I know. This actually is just horseradish, but it could be any bitter herb. Any bitter herb. Traditionally in our country, we use the horseradish and, and this is taken and a piece of matzah. You take a piece of matzah, you dip it into the horseradish, the bitter herb, called the Hebrew moror, and you take a bite. And when you bite into the bitterness of the root of the horseradish or this kind of horseradish, whatever it may be, whatever bitter herb you're using, if it brings tears to your eyes, it works really well. It's very hard to do, honestly, footnote, very hard to pull off this in Texas, where we're very used to eating hot and spicy foods. Oftentimes the reaction is there any more? But that's an anomaly, I think, for Texas. But nonetheless, the bitter herbs represent the bitterness of the slavery that the Jewish people endured. So the bitterness of the slavery that the Jewish people endured. Now, taking us to the Last Supper for a moment, it is at this moment, at this point in the Seder meal, the marriage of the matzah, the unleavened bread, with the bitter herb, dipping into the sauce, that Jesus, after having said, "One of you among us is about to betray me," John says, "Who is it?" And Jesus says, "It's the one with whom I'm dipping in the bitter herbs." And it's the one he hands to Judas, the matzah with the bitter herb on it. That is how Judas is identified as the betrayer. Jesus knows, Judas knows, and John knows, maybe Peter. But nonetheless, Judas very shortly thereafter leaves to do quickly what he must do. So for us as believers, when we partake of these symbols of Passover, We also have a new symbol that's added in, a new significance added to the bitter herbs, and that's the bitterness of the betrayal of Jesus by one of his closest companions. Now, that is followed, so we have the parsley and the salt water, and we have the bitter herbs. Now we have a beautiful, sweet apple nut mixture, fantastic, called charoset. Charoset, go ahead and say that at home. Nobody's around. You don't have to worry about using your Hebrew chuch and offending the person. Just watch your screen a little bit. Charoset, right? And this is designed to represent the mortar that the Jewish people built the cities of Pharaoh with. It's also nice and sweet, so that when it comes to having to take the bitter herbs and to remove that bitter taste from your mouth, the sweet will always overpower the bitter. And so we remember the sweetness of freedom more than we remember the bitterness of slavery. So this is the charoset that also is placed on matzah and eaten next. Finally, we have two items on here which were not on the plate, were not on the table in the time of Jesus at the Last Supper. The first is the shank bone of a lamb. Now, the shank bone of a lamb was not on the table because, well, it was, but it was part of the whole lamb. Remember, the lamb was eaten that night, and they were careful not to break a bone. But however, since 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, there were no longer any sacrifices because there were no longer a temple. And so the Jewish people, in commemoration, in remembering as a memorial of what the sacrifices were for Passover, they placed the shank bone of a lamb. Sometimes if they can't find the shank bone of a lamb, they'll have a chicken bone, some other kind of a bone that they'll put on the table. And what this signifies is that we all have bones to pick with one another. No. That's a whole sermon I have no time for right now. But what this bone represents, obviously, is what the Passover Seder used to be when the temple stood. However, when I pick up or I look at the shank bone of a lamb on a Passover Seder table, I'm reminded of the words of Jesus' cousin at the beginning of the Gospel of John. And as John sees Jesus approaching, he says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And see, Jesus identified at the very beginning, the outset of his ministry, publicly, as the Passover lamb who would remove the sin, not just of Israel, but of the world. A beautiful Passover symbol on our Seder table. And there's one more item on the table. Again, was not part of the Last Supper in the time of the temple, in the time of the New Testament. But this roasted egg, it's a roasted egg, was added to the Seder table to complement, not complement like, say, Hanashuluk, but to complement, to add to correspond to, the shank bone of a lamb. You see, the next day after Passover, in other words, the first day of unleavened bread, the afternoon after the Seder meal was eaten, there was a secondary sacrifice that was offered by the priests on behalf of all Israel called the Hagigah. And this roasted egg, that's why it's roasted, because it reminds us of this Hagigah, this secondary sacrifice that was made not just for individual family members, family groupings, like the previous day's sacrifice of the lamb was, hence the shank bone, but this was a sacrifice on behalf of the nation of Israel. So, all told, we have several various different symbolic elements to engage our senses to remember the the story of Passover. So now getting back to the cups. We had that first cup, the cup of sanctification. That would have started the evening off. We have at this point the cup of deliverance. Now, the cup of deliverance, the second cup, this is an interesting cup. It's an interesting story, and I don't want to make a mess here, so I'm not going to show you how it works. If you've been to a Passover, been to one of our Passover Seders, you've seen it, or if you've had your own Passover Seder, you see it. Suffice it to say that it involves the juice or the wine, and it involves the cup. So you take the second cup, and again, these are just symbolic. This would be the size of the cup I'd actually drink. This would be the second cup, the cup of deliverance. And before it's drunk by everyone at the Seder table, it is diminished. Why? Because wine, the fruit of the vine, is a symbol of joy in the Bible and in Jewish thinking. And the joy of the Jewish people cannot overflow this cup because their freedom was purchased at a great cost, a great expense, the lives and suffering of the Egyptians. And so with each plague, and there are 10 plagues, with each plague and for each plague, we recite them, and we diminish with each plague, we diminish this cup of joy, this cup of deliverance, we diminish by one drop. You take your pinky, and you take drop by drop by drop, plague by plague. You diminish the cup by 10 drops, because the joy of the Jewish people is not complete.
Hi, my name is Bob Chisholm. I teach at Dallas Theological Seminary. I'd like to say a few words on behalf of my former student and friend, Stephen Gare, the director of Sojourner Ministries. These are unprecedented times in our world. The COVID-19 virus has afflicted thousands in our country. Many have lost jobs and are under heavy financial pressure. Christian ministries are facing unique challenges. Sojourner Ministries is no exception. Stephen is unable to fuel the ministry by visiting churches, holding his annual Passover banquet, or distributing his books and videos in the normal fashion. The fuel tanks of the ministry are, as it were, close to being depleted. Most of you who are watching this are friends of the ministry. Like me, you appreciate its value. You know the importance of studying the Jewish heart of Christianity. You know how God has used the ministry to further Jesus' commission to make disciples. Stephen is grateful for your past support. He knows some of you are not in a position to help financially right now, and he welcomes your continuing prayer support. But everyone's circumstances are different. God has put some of you in a position where you are able to help in this time of need. On behalf of Stephen and Sojourner Ministries, I invite you to prayerfully consider doing just that. Thank you for your time, and may the Lord bless you richly.
We come to a time in our program where we're going to give you an opportunity to become a ministry partner with Sojourner Ministries. Sojourner Ministries, like many ministries at this time, needs your support. You can give to Sojourner Ministries right now by going into the website sojournerministries.com/donate and making an online contribution there. Or you can send that by U.S. mail to Sojourner Ministries, P.O. Box 497972, Garland, Texas 75049. Thank you in advance for your generous contribution. Throughout the evening, we will display on the top of the screen the message sojournerministries.com/donate to give you an opportunity to make your contribution. I will now turn you over to Stephen for the balance of the program. Enjoy.
And now we come to the climax of the Seder. We see this clearly articulated in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, with the breaking of the final piece of matzah. That, of course, is the Afikomen. You'll remember this broken half a piece of matzah that we set aside, this ceremonial dessert. As we look at matzah, this is the best picture of Jesus that we have. Not just any matzah, but this broken half piece of matzah set aside that returns for the end of the Seder meal. The best picture of Jesus that we have. It's far better than a statue, an icon, a picture in the back of your Bible, the fresco by Leonardo da Vinci. It's better than the movie with the blue-eyed Jesus and the English accent. It's the best picture of Jesus that we have. Why do I say that? First of all, because you can see it's perfectly flat. It has no leaven in it. Symbolically, it is sinless bread. Not 99/44, 100% pure, but absolutely pure. No leaven in it. And our Messiah, he was 100% pure as well. Completely without sin. He was the unleavened Messiah. It is his very unleavened nature, his sinless nature, that qualifies him to be our Messiah. If there's nothing else that you remember from this entire presentation, hold in your mind the sinlessness of our Messiah, the unleavened Messiah. And it's not just because of the lack of leaven that this reminds us of the Messiah. If we look at the physical characteristics of matzah, and again, this is going to be true for any kind of matzah, machine-made like this, or handmade like we looked at earlier in the evening, every piece of matzah is made with perforations. And the matzah dough doesn't come pre-perforated. It's done by the baker. The matzah has to be made to be perforated. Now, who puts those perforations in there? Of course, the baker does. Now, our Messiah, he was perforated. He had holes. He didn't come that way, however. He was made that way. Who made him that way? We did. He was pierced for our transgressions. Isaiah 53 again. The Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. It's not only the prophetic words of Isaiah 53 that I remember when I look at the holes in matzah. It also reminds me of the words of the prophet Zechariah, speaking of the time when the Jewish people would be surrounded by nations without resource and without recourse. Only one chance for deliverance, and that's to cry out to God. And as Zechariah describes the scene, their Messiah comes for them. And Zechariah says, they will look upon me whom they have pierced. When did the Jewish people pierce God? It was only one time, in his incarnate form, second person as the Messiah. They will look upon me whom they have pierced. And their reaction is described this way. And they will mourn with the intensity that one mourns the loss of an only son. In the Hebrew culture, the Jewish culture, that's your retirement program. Your children are your retirement program, and your sons are your future. And if you only have one son, all your eggs are in that basket. Your entire future is forget the fact that you love him and he's your son, but if you lose your son, you have not only lost your child, but you've lost any future hope whatsoever. That is the intensity of mourning that is described by Zechariah when the Jewish people look up and see Yeshua and realize who their Messiah actually is. They will look upon me whom they have pierced. So, matzah, unleavened bread, a beautiful picture of our Messiah in so many ways. But there's yet more. Not only is it flat, not only is it pierced, you also see it has stripes. Matzah is made on a grill. Our Messiah, he too had stripes. Isaiah 53 again tells us, by his stripes we are healed. A beautiful picture of our Messiah. Even Yeshua would speak of himself, when he spoke of himself in metaphorical terms, John, he uses the term several times. I am the bread of life. Yeshua, Jesus, identifying with unleavened bread. Even his birthplace is telling. Where was Yeshua born? It's not a trick question. You know where he was born, in Bethlehem. Hebrew, it's Beit Lechem, the house of bread. See, the bread of life was born in the house of bread. He who has an ear, let him hear. And Jesus, at the end of the Seder meal, in the climactic moments of the Seder meal, he takes bread, this particular piece of bread, the Afikomen, the broken piece of matzah, and he says, "This is my body. It's given for you. And whenever you do this in remembrance of me." This Afikomen, this symbolic representation of God's redemption, eaten by every Passover Seder participant from time lost in the shrouds of mists of history. Jesus says, when you eat this sign of God's redemption, think not just of the Passover lamb. From now on, remember this Passover lamb, because it's my body given for you. And he took it, and he broke it, and he gave it to them. Even the prayer, the thanksgiving that Jesus said before distributing this bread, same prayer that Jewish people say today over bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Exactly what would occur to Jesus in 3 days' time. The bread of life brought forth from the earth. You see, it becomes very clear by this point that what Jesus is establishing is a new era in human history based upon his sacrifice, an era that we commemorate every time we partake of the bread. And likewise, the bread was immediately followed, as it is in the Seder ritual, by the cup. At this point, we're in 3 cups. The cup of redemption. We've experienced the cup of sanctification, the cup of deliverance, now the cup of redemption. And this cup is the liquid complement, if you will, to the Afikomen, to the broken piece of matzah, to the, and after you've had a piece of matzah, you know it also has to be washed down. So they work together in tandem. But Jesus said something when he took the cup. He said something to his disciples that was extraordinary, that was life-changing, that would have been electrifying. If the disciples had not already been reclining, it would have knocked them off their feet. Speaking of their feet, if he had not already washed their feet that day, it would have knocked their socks off. What Jesus says is revolutionary. And you know, if you've been a believer for some period of time, that means that you've partaken in several communions. Maybe for some of you, countless communions. And because some of the same words are said with every communion, sometimes the revolutionary, electrifying luster begins to rub off just through sheer repetition. That's human nature. And let us place ourselves in that upper room. And let's listen to the words of Yeshua as recorded by the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Let's put them together and really hear, maybe as if for the first time, what Jesus was communicating. He said, this cup, in other words, the cup of redemption, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for the many, for the forgiveness of sin. Let me say it again. Make sure we get it. This cup is the new covenant, the Brit Hadashah, in my blood, poured out for the many. Are you the many? Of course you are. Me too, whether we're Jewish or Gentile. Poured out for the many. Why? For the forgiveness of sin. This cup of redemption that symbolizes God's redemption of the Jewish people at Passover. It's a physical reminder of God's power and love and concern and preservation. Yeshua takes this cup and invests in it revolutionary new language. See, because when he says the new covenant, Brit Hadashah, that's a powerful symbol of God's promise. What is the Brit Hadashah? What is the new covenant? First of all, what's a covenant? It's a good question. A covenant is a contractual, binding arrangement made between two or more parties. And the Bible, the entire ancient Near East, is chock full of solemn covenants, contractual agreements like the new covenant. But let's think if we can remember some of the covenants in the Bible. We have, of course, the Noahic Covenant. You remember that? The Noahic Covenant is God making a covenant with Noah and all of creation, by the way, that he would not again destroy the world by flood. He gives a sign, the rainbow. We have the Abrahamic Covenant. That's a complex series of blessings and promises that God gives to Abraham and to his progeny through Isaac and Jacob, in other words, the Jewish people. And together we call that the Abrahamic Covenant. Theologians, not the most creative bunch. We often name the covenants after the primary recipient or conduit of the covenant. The Noahic covenant made with Noah, Abrahamic covenant made with Abraham. Of course, that brings us to the Mosaic covenant. That's not made with Moses, but through Moses at Sinai, made with the Israelites, with the Jewish people. It's followed by the Davidic covenant, made specifically to David and to his progeny, his royal progeny. And finally, the New Covenant, which is revealed in Jeremiah, extrapolated in Ezekiel as well, but the primary text is Jeremiah 31 and following. It reads like this: Behold, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant, Brit Hadashah, with the house of Israel and Judah, not like the old covenant that I made with them at Sinai. That would be the Mosaic Covenant, which they broke. They could not keep it. But I will put my law within you. I will write them on your hearts. They will not be placed on stone tablets. It's not an external covenant of stone, but it is written directly on the heart of God's people. And all will know me, from the greatest to the least. And I will be your God, and you will be my people. How will this be accomplished? How will, as Ezekiel explains, how will the heart of stone be replaced with a heart of flesh with this new covenant? It will not be by the will or the ability of man to follow external laws, but it will be by the power of the Spirit of God, as the laws of God are written on the conscience of mankind, all who follow him, all who participate in this new covenant. Now, the Jewish people had been waiting for a new covenant since the time that Jeremiah explained the promise, over 6 centuries before the time of Jesus. Why were they looking for a replacement covenant? What's wrong with the Mosaic Covenant? What's wrong with the Sinai Covenant? There's nothing wrong with the Mosaic Covenant. There was, however, something wrong with the people. They could not keep the Mosaic Covenant. And that's not a Jewish problem. That's a human problem. When I say the Mosaic Covenant, I'm talking about the Mosaic Covenant, I'm talking about the Torah. I'm talking about 613 positive and negative commandments, thou shalt nots, that God gave the Israelites through Moses at Sinai. You remember the Jewish people said, all that God commands we will do, we will observe. And within a few chapters, they're worshiping a golden calf. The irony is palpable, and the Jewish people's inability to keep the Mosaic Covenant is clear from the outset. Again, not a problem with the covenant, There's a problem with humanity, with the people. Not a Jewish problem, a human problem. No one could keep all 613 positive and negative commandments. Only one individual ever lived who could keep every law that applied to him completely and thoroughly, and he's a special case. And for 6 centuries, the Jewish people cried out, "Oh Lord, give us hearts of flesh, not hearts of stone." And at that Last Supper, Jesus, looking into the eyes of those individuals whom he most loved in this world, he said, "That which you have waited for all your lives, that which you have been longing for, your fathers before you and your grandfathers and great-grandfathers before you looked for, hoped for, and died without seeing, you now see." See, the new covenant is here, and it's ratified in my blood. I'll be shedding it soon. And its purpose is for the forgiveness of sin. Sins forgiven in the new covenant, the Mosaic Covenant, had no solution for. The blood of bulls and goats could not atone for. But the blood of the new covenant, represented by the third cup, the cup of redemption, that is a symbol that changes lives. You see, because this cup in the blood of our Messiah, shed for our forgiveness, whether we be Jewish or Gentile, the many, this is not just a cup of redemption to remember God's redemption of Israel at the Exodus, the Passover, and Messiah's redemption of humanity, all who choose to say yes to Jesus. It is not just a cup of redemption. It is a cup of reconciliation. You see, because of our inability, being human, to maintain God's holy standards, there is a chasm that exists. It's a historic chasm that the Jewish people discovered early on, from the golden calf onward. They realized they could not attain God's level standards of holiness. What could they do to bridge that gap? No matter how many bulls, no matter how many goats, no matter how many perfect unblemished lambs are sacrificed, that chasm still exists. But the good news for every Jewish person watching this right now is that there is no chasm that cannot be bridged by what this cup represents, the blood of our Messiah. There is not a thing that our Jewish people cannot be forgiven for if they put their trust in what this cup represents, the blood of our Messiah. In other words, the Jewish people can be not estranged from God, but reconciled to Him. How? Because of the blood of our Messiah, what this cup represents. And that's good news not just for Jewish people, but for all people, for Gentiles as well. You see, because if the Jewish people with our history, let's face it, by the time our Messiah came on the scene, Moses and Passover and the Seder were already 1,500 years old as the Jewish people understood their estrangement from God. That's why they were so hungry for a new covenant. But the great news for every Jewish person is that there's no chasm that cannot be bridged by the blood of our Messiah. It's great news not just for Jewish people, but for Gentiles as well. Because if the Jewish people, if we could be estranged from God, with our history, with our relationship, with our covenantal relationship with God, then how much deeper, broader, and wider is the abyss that exists between God and a people that Paul calls in Ephesians helpless and hopeless, strangers to the covenant, and without God in this world. The great news for every one of us is that there's no chasm, no abyss so wide, so deep that it cannot be bridged by the blood of our Messiah, Jew and Gentile alike. Well, that's a vertical reconciliation between all of us and God. But there's also a horizontal dimension to it as well. You see, because of this cup and our common trust in what this cup represents, our common faith, we, Jews, non-Jews, we're mishbucha. We're one tribe, one clan, one people, one family, reconciled one to another. I don't know if you realize this, but biblically speaking, Gentiles and Jews often at enmity with one another. But through our Messiah, we are reconciled one to another. To God, vertically, and to one another, horizontally. I believe that the fourth cup was left purposely. I like to think this. And is left until that time when we, together with our Messiah, with His return, and at His return, we celebrate the consummation of the age as He comes and brings the Messianic age in and ushers in the Messianic kingdom, that we will together drink deeply of the cup of consummation as one era ends and the new era begins. There's one final point that every kid knows at the Seder, and that has to do with the cup of Elijah. Elijah always has a place at a Passover Seder. The Jewish tradition is that there is, based upon the prophet Malachi in the Hebrew prophets, that there will be a forerunner for the Messiah, someone acting in the power and spirit of Elijah, who will prepare the way for our Messiah. Well, our Messiah has already come, and his forerunner as well, if you will accept it. Jesus tells us in the Gospels that John, his cousin, was Elijah and fulfilled that prophetic role, wore the mantle of the forerunner of the Messiah, the role of Elijah. John came, our Messiah came, he has ascended, returned to the right hand of his Father, and we await right now his return. What that means for us is that we are not waiting for Elijah. Jewish people have a tradition of setting a place for him and a cup and put a pillow on his chair, and they have the children go to the front door and go look and see, do you see an old man coming? Is Elijah coming to announce the Messiah is coming? And the kids all go and look. They open the door, and depending on neighborhood you're in, you say, quick, get in before you see anybody, before anybody sees you. But Elijah, look, Elijah's not coming. He's already come. So what that means for us is that between this moment when you're watching and the coming of our Messiah could be any time. We're awaiting not a sign, not a person, not an announcement. It's the doctrine of imminence. So my question for you as we wrap up is that it is not a question as to whether the Messiah is going to return. His return is certain. There's a lot of things in life that are uncertain. It's a big joke, that the only two things in life that are certain, death and taxes. We as believers can add a third, the return of our Messiah. It's day now, but night is coming. Many of us living in fear and panic. Many of us frightened, uncomfortable, uncertain. But let me remind you that we may not always know the what, but we assuredly know the whom. Our Messiah is returning for us, and his return is sooner today than when we first believed. That is what we do each time we take communion, after all. If the Messiah does not return during our time of quarantine, and we are allowed to come back and worship together, one of the things that I know we'll enjoy doing together is partaking of communion together. And it's an opportunity for each one of us, whether we're long in the faith or just came to faith, each one of us to remind one another, all of us whom we love, that our Messiah's return is soon, and we must be ready. Are you ready? Will you greet him with, "Oh Lord, bad timing. I really had so many other things that I was doing in the meantime. I really wanted to get and advance my career. I wanted to see my grandchildren get married. I wanted to see so many things. I wanted to get my pension. I've invested so much already. Couldn't you wait just a little long? No, are you going to be that person? Are you going to be the person who, when the shofar blasts and our Messiah catches us up to join him, will he catch you doing something that you'll be embarrassed to be involved in? You're going to be that person? Or are you going to be the person who longs for the return of our Messiah, who, as you hear the trumpet blast and as that one day that is certain approaches, and when it arrives, when you get to look our Lord, our Savior, our Mashiach, in his eyes, face to face, panim el panim, will you be able to say, I've been waiting for you? What took you so long? And so let's end, not as Jewish Passover Seders end, which traditionally is next year in Jerusalem. Well, God willing, we'll be able to take trips to Israel again next year in Jerusalem, amen. But I like to end our Passover Seders like the Bible ends, like the very last pictures portrayed in the New Testament, and say with you, Maranatha, even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus.